Welcome, folks that have logged in. We'll give it a few more minutes for people to join. We'll get started then. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Sure, there are folks coming from back-to-back calls, so we'll give it a few minutes, give people a little bit of breathing room before we dive in. Thanks for joining us. The attendee numbers keep going up, so it gives me a sign to wait a little bit longer as people join. It won't be too long before we get started. All right, well, I will get things started. Thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time to learn something new and for us to share with you some really great insights that we've learned over the last 3 years. So, you are joining us for this webinar on the financial impacts of cover crops, where we are going to share with you financial data and insights that we've gained from working with partners and producers in the upper Midwest over the last 3 years to really understand the financial impacts that cover crops have had on the financial performance of their operations. Next slide, Madeline. So, as many of you know, I'm sure cover crops can play an important role in improving soil health by increasing soil organic matter and helping to reduce erosion. Next slide. And those cover crops are especially beneficial and produce value to producers during extreme precipitation events, during which that improved soil health helps drain soils more effectively. And then on the flip side, during drought times, during which that healthy soil holds on to more moisture to that organic matter that it has built. And practices like cover crops play an important role in building that soil health and helping producers manage those ups and downs of weather conditions they face that we've seen, especially over the last couple of years. But unfortunately, farmers that we speak to and from surveys that have been done really share that the lack of information on the financial costs, benefits, and risks associated with cover crops really hold back their confidence in their decisions in implementing a practice that anytime you're implementing a new practice brings risks to your operation, both operationally and financially. For example, in the last cover crop survey that was done by some partners in 2025, 74% of producer respondents identified financial costs and returns as one of the greatest concerns they have in making cover crop implementation decisions, making it one of the most commonly reported barriers to adopting cover cropping and conservation practices. And this lack of information really holds back implementation decisions by producers since it presents risks and they don't have enough financial information to be confident in the adoption decisions that they'll make. And on top of that, it doesn't only impact producers, this lack of financial information on cover crops, it also holds back their partners, such as ag lenders, food companies, state and federal programs from developing the most effective programs and financial incentives to support producers in making the adoption of cover crops profitable and sustainably profitable over time. So it holds back producers, but it also holds back their partners from supporting them in the most effective ways to make it profitable. So this lack of information is why in 2021, a partnership was formed between Environmental Defense Fund, the Minnesota State Farm Business Management Program, the University of Minnesota's Center for Farm Financial Management, and a host of other partners across Minnesota and surrounding states to establish a process to be able to repeatedly gather cover crop financial data from real farms in the upper Midwest that both help fill this information gap, but also directly go back and help producers with that data to make good financial decisions when implementing conservation practices like cover crops. And we set out at the beginning of this partnership and throughout to create a program and a process for gathering and disseminating that data that can be a blueprint for other states and other production areas across the country to continuously gather consistent data on conservation practices to understand and communicate back to producers the financial implications they should consider when making adoption decisions. Next slide. So in today's webinar, we're going to be sharing from that program, from the work we've done with producers and partners over the last 3 years, and you'll learn the main findings of the cover crop profitability data that we've gathered and how it can inform producers and their partners in effectively implementing cover crops in a way that is profitable to their operations. We'll be having a panel discussion to hear how different stakeholders are seeing this financial data and what they're taking away from it. We'll have representatives from Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the University of Minnesota, the Farm Business Management Program, and a Minnesota producer and a representative of the Minnesota Farmers Union. Throughout the session, make sure you put any questions that come up into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take some time at the end of the session to answer your questions, including the panelists will have a chance to weigh in as well. So now I'm going to hand it over to Milan on our team to walk you through some of the findings from our 3 years of cover crop financial data. Milan.
Thank you, Vincent. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Hoang, and I'm a senior research analyst on the agriculture finance team at EDF. Really excited to be here today to share with you some of the latest findings on cover crop profitability from our multi-year program that Vincent have already described. We'll be digging into some of the big questions that farmers and their partners have about cover crops, such as what are the actual costs and returns of planting cover crop, what factors make cover crop adoption profitable, and how do they affect the performance of the following cash crops. So those are all important questions. Let's dive right in. Well, first of all, let's take a look at where the farms in our program are located. So since 2022, our team has collected financial data of 124 farms across Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. So each year, we published an annual report sharing the results, and you can find them on our website. For today, we're going to zoom in on a smaller group of 41 Minnesota farms that submitted data every year from 2022 to 2024. These farms planted cover crops on over 100 fields using a variety of cover crop species and mixes. And so by focusing on this very consistent data set, we were able to track cover crop performance and evaluate their profitability trends over time. Here's a bit more detail about the farms in our sample and how they compare to the other operations in Minnesota. So you can see that these farms are in fact very similar to the average operations across key metrics like farm size, producer age, and farming experience. In other words, they are broadly representative of a typical farm that you will see, which means the findings from these farms are highly relevant to other farms in the region and those with similar characteristics. With that, let's dive into the key findings. So here's the first big takeaway. We found that cover crop profitability varies a lot. And one of the main reasons is how farmers are using them. So this graph shows the costs and revenue of different cover crop species on a typical farm between 2022 and 2024. You can see on the cost side here, the gray column, we included a range of direct expenses, and the biggest being seed, machinery, and fuel. On the revenue side, the green columns, cover crop income was generated from crop production, grazing of the cover crop, as well as payments from cost share and other incentive programs. Now, one of the main reasons we see such variation in expenses is because of the intended use of the cover crop. For example, when farmers grow cover crops for feed, like rice silage, they pay higher machinery costs for harvesting. So while cover crop mixes planted mainly for soil health purposes, generally in this case, had lower direct expenses. So as you can see on the graph, rice silage has the highest total cost, around $120 per acre. Other mixes came in much lower, at around $40 per acre. That higher cost for rice silage was largely due to the added machinery expense when producers harvest them for feed. And then on the revenue side, rice silage was also the only cover crop type that generated a positive return for participating farmers. The other cover crop mixes did not create direct revenue to offset the expenses. Well, keep in mind, though, that for now, we're only focusing on the cover crop itself, not its impact on the following cash crop. So this is something we'll get into those broader impacts in just a few slides. Our second takeaway is that cost share payments play an important role. They significantly offset the cost of cover crops for farmers who receive the payments. These programs often include funding from state and federal agencies, as well as private sector incentives that cover part of the expense of planting cover crops. So let's take a look at the actual numbers. Over the 3-year period from 2022 to 2024, cost share payments cover more than half of the total direct cost of planting cover crops. But only 27% of the cover crop systems in our study actually had access to these programs. So this just shows that there's an ongoing need to expand access to cost share opportunities so that more farmers can access these cost share programs and receive the support that they need to implement cover crops. And then another key question that we wanted to answer with our data was that what factors are driving profitable cover crop adoption? To understand that, we looked at the top 20% most profitable cover crop systems in our sample, and then compared them to the bottom 20%. What we found is really interesting, that most successful systems consistently stood out because they were able to generate revenue from their cover crops while also able to manage their expenses effectively. So looking a little bit closer, the most profitable system generated revenue by harvesting their cover crops, which was often used as livestock feed or saved as seed for future planting or seed sales. They were also more likely to receive additional income from cost share payments. And then at the same time, these farmers kept their expenses low through more effective cost management. On a typical high profit field, total direct expenses were only about half of what we saw on low profit field. And then among those expenses, seed and machinery repairs were the biggest items that set the most profitable farms apart. So far, we've focused on the revenue and expenses of cover crops themselves, but for cover crops, they can also influence the profitability of the following cash crops, and they are doing so by impacting soil health, water availability, and planting conditions. And that's a very critical part of their overall economics, and that's something that we studied as well. And it's important to access not just the direct costs and returns of cover crops, but also how they affect the financial results of the following crops. And so with our 3 years of data, we found that corn was consistently more profitable after cover crops, and that wasn't the case for soybeans. For this analysis, we compare the financial performance of the main commodity crops, and in this case, corn and soybeans, that were grown after a cover crop with a regional benchmark. And the regional benchmark is the average of all fields in the region growing the same commodity crop without a cover crop. Let's see the actual results. So here we found that corn planted after a cover crop was more profitable than the average field without cover crops in all 3 years of our analysis. On the slide, you can see two graphs, one showing gross return and the other one showing net return. For each year, the blue columns represent corn fields planted after a cover crop, and the gray columns represent average corn fields in the region that were planted without a cover crop. Gross returns on the left include income from crop production, crop insurance, as well as government payments and cost share. Net returns on the right are calculated as gross return minus all of the direct and overhead expenses. And so here we're showing net returns before labor and management only, but you will find net returns after labor and management as well in our full report, and the trend is the same as you see here. So while gross return was similar across both groups, net returns for corn after a cover crop was consistently higher in all 3 years of the analysis. And this higher net returns were driven mainly by lower expenses, including lower fertilizer expense in some cases. While one possible reason is that farmers using cover crops may have been able to cut back on fertilizer because the mixes that they planted can add nutrients to the soil and therefore reduce fertilizer expenses. If you would like to see a more detailed breakdown of revenues and expenses, you can download our full report from the website, and that will include a complete table comparing these fields across each revenue and expense item. So moving on for soybeans, however, we saw a different trend. Soybeans after a cover crop was less profitable than the average field without cover crops. And on this slide, the green columns represent soybean fields planted after a cover crop, and the gray columns represent average soybean fields in the region without a cover crop. And the differences that you see in gross return were larger in 2022 and 2023 than in 24. And at the same time, net returns for soybean planted after a cover crop were lower than those without, and most significantly in 2022 and 24. That said, there are still good reasons to plant cover crops before soybean, and our findings just suggest that farmers and their partners should carefully consider their potential impact on profitability and work to find ways to balance cover crop benefits with their financial goals. So to recap, here's the key takeaways from our analysis. First of all, over 3 years, we found that cover crop revenue and expenses varied widely, and this is mainly driven by the intended use of the cover crop. For farmers who received cost share programs, those payments offset more than half of the total costs, and profitability was driven by generating revenue from cover crop through cost share, crop production, and other uses, combined with effective cost management. And finally, corn following cover crop was profitably consistently, while soybeans were not. But it's important to note that these findings may not present the full picture. Some of the benefits of cover crop may only show up after a longer period of time or during extreme weather events. And there are also many other factors that can influence the financial outcomes that we did not capture directly in our data. So for example, things like land productivity, growing conditions, and management choices that affect a farmer's decision to plant a cover crops and where to plant them. So all of these factors contribute to the differences in profitability that you see in the final results. So looking ahead, what's next for us? In the immediate term, we are going to continue to collect financial data on cover crops in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin throughout 2025. And we will plan to publish those results next year. So do get in touch with us and follow our website and LinkedIn to get updates on those reports. We will also continue to analyze the successful cover crop users to better understand what are the key drivers of profitability, and hopefully be able to share that insights that can help other producers in developing their strategies. And finally, as we continue to gather more years of data in the future, we'll be able to create a more comprehensive trend analysis of cover crop profitability over time. Okay, so now I believe we've covered all of the data. It's time for the exciting part, our panel discussions, and Vincent will be our moderator today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mylan. Such rich insights across the data we've been able to gather. And really, one thing we're really grateful for is that throughout this process, we've had amazing partners that will be part of this panel discussion. It takes a lot of different partners with different expertise and networks to make data gathering like this consistently valuable back to producers and to the broader ag sector. Including the farmers themselves that took the time to gather this additional data and work with their instructors to provide these wonderful insights to you all today. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for the conversation today. We've got Keith Olander joining us. Keith is the Executive Director at the Minnesota State Northern Agricultural Center for Excellence, also called Accentric. Keith has been an amazing partner and a leader in developing and continuing to establish this program. We also have Pauline van Nurden, who is the Associate Director at the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota. Pauline has also been the brains behind being able to integrate this financial data gathering within the FinBin database, which she'll speak more about. We have Anne Schwagerl, the Vice President of Minnesota Farmers Union and also a producer herself. And then last but not least, we have Brad Jordahl-Redlin, a manager of many things, as he told us we couldn't fit it all on the slide here at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Thank you all for joining us today in this panel discussion. Anne, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself, share more about your family's operation and your experience with conservation practices. We're excited to hear directly from you and your experience.
Sure, absolutely. I am very grateful we got a little bit of rain yesterday, so you're not catching me in a tractor or combine. Hi, I'm Ann Schwagerl. I farm in west central Minnesota along the border with the Dakotas and run with my family a diversified grain farming operation. Our farm's been through a few different iterations in the last 13 years that we've been, my husband and I have been on the operation, transitioning into a generational family farm. And through all of that, we've been enthusiastic farm business management students. As we've kind of gone through a couple different cycles of the ag economy, it's been really critical for us to have on our farm. I also support my farming habit with an off-farm job with Minnesota Farmers Union, where I am privileged to serve as the vice president of the organization. We're a grassroots membership-driven organization. Our farm is a primarily corn and soybeans farm, but we also have and always had a third and fourth crop in our rotation. We're big believers in conservation, agriculture, and that our land is our greatest resource. And so, how can we use it both most effectively and efficiently, and also protect it for what will hopefully be a sixth generation on this operation? Um, and through that, we've been implementing cover crops since 2000, I believe, 14, when we experimented with our first EQIP granted cost share for cover crops. And for many years, our farm was in organic production. We're back into conventional production now. Um, and we were seeing that, keeping the soil covered for more months out of the year protected it for our next cash crop. It is interesting to see the farm profitability, how that shifts based on which cover crop it's the cash crop that's following it. But we've been using cover crops. I was just finished cover no tilling yesterday, 150 acres of rye into our corn stubble, getting ready for next year. We've had a lot of learning lessons over the last 10 years, 10 plus years of doing cover cropping, and some wins and some pretty major losses as well. It's like a lot of things on the farm. You take your lessons on the nose, but that it's been, I think, something that obviously we continue to do and continue to play around with and do differently. And I think every year we're doing something a little bit different on the farm as we learn from what works and what sometimes doesn't work so well on our operation.
That's wonderful. And you've been, as you mentioned, a student in the Minnesota Farm Business Management Program for many years, and part of this cohort that's been gathering cover crop financial data that Milan presented earlier. Can you share a little bit more from your perspective the value of that data to your decision making on the farm as you go through those ups and downs and learnings of how cover crops work or don't work on your operation, and how other producers might utilize that information to inform their management decisions?
Sure. I've said this a couple times in different settings, but we learned very early that we can't farm on enthusiasm alone, and that our farm business management instructor is a really great check on sometimes that enthusiasm of we go to him and we say, Darren, we've got a great idea. We're going to plant Kernza. And he's like, great. How's that going to cash flow? And we're like, we'll figure it out. And it is one of those things of okay, like let's work through the economics of this together, and we did. But it's a great way, especially, we're in our second now of our relatively short career down cycle of the ag economy, right? And the value of farm business management is, to me, that I know every dollar and cent that goes in on each enterprise on my operation, and how that cash flows, and I can make really good informed decisions about what kind of practices or investments that we want to make on the farm.
And that's such a great, so helpful to hear the impact that it has to have someone supporting you in those decisions, being able to do the analysis and the data. Keith, you help run the program that provides that to producers. Tell us a little bit more about the Farm Business Management Program and bring us to the kitchen table. Like, what does it look like for an instructor to be at a producer's table helping them with their financials, and especially around these practices like cover crops? How does that fit into the conversations that they have?
Thanks, Vincent. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, privileged to be able to be one of the leaders of the program. And just some background on FBM. It's been around about 7 decades, and I share that because that gives you some idea of its history. just this integrity of data comes from the fact that these instructors, it is a college program, but it does not happen at a college campus. It's on the farm, as Ann alludes to at the kitchen table. And just this idea of this discussion that occurs, and pointedly so, what are the break evens? We were going through, as Ann mentioned, some tough times. And so having some difficult discussions about how do you build up profitability and longevity. And really this comes down to a matter of trust between the faculty and the farmers in whatever the case is in terms of a new adoption, in this case, cover crops. What is the actual cost and what does that do to the operations economics around that? But it's really, there's nothing in this for the faculty from a sales perspective or anything like that. It's about family, personal goals, business goals. And so the faculty come in with that focus of really helping that farmer and figuring out, the longevity, or even Ann alludes to the transition piece that's there. And across the state, we've got nearly 3,000 farms, and that was 65 faculty. So try to offer that from what Ann is describing and do that in a way then that gives them opportunity to make good decisions based upon good data. And that's part of why this cohort for cover crops is kind of interesting, because it builds alongside of what Pauline's able to do at CFFM under the FinBin database. In this case, give farmers, this data and what are my peers doing and how do I rank among them, benchmark, and then build out for decision making as it relates to these type margins we're dealing with.
And Keith, over time, the producers that have been participating in this project have continued to provide that financial data. Tell us a little bit more about how that is being shared back with the producers in field days and the sessions that you hold, and what value have you heard back from producers about this information and how it's informing their decision making?
Absolutely. There's two major ways in which the data is utilized. Number one, for the student, which we call student, but these are farmers ages 18 to 84 across the state. And number one is, what is it the break even of their particular commodity or commodities? And how does that benchmark against their peers in a regional setting or in a state setting accordingly, and break that down. So that benchmark piece allows the family to set goals in terms of efficiency or expansion or contraction, whatever the case may be, around that. Additionally, then, when you think about the second side of this is the public, what I'll call public sector. So the data comes together anonymously, no names attached, but then that benchmark piece can be shared publicly. So we can help educate perhaps those on the legislative side that are looking at those issues, or just lenders in general. Certainly as we think about tight cash flows, everybody's concerned, but it's one of those things, if you're not an outlier, then it's likely that, lending perhaps gets a little easier when you find yourself in amongst the pack, so to speak, around that. So it's, well, number one, the data is good for students and individuals at the kitchen table. But number two, how do we think publicly about informing both legislative advocacy, consumer advocacy, lenders, et cetera, about the data, what the state of farm economics is like, and what are the decisions that are having to be made on the farm as we go forward, relating to cover crops or any other enterprise they'd want to add into their operation.
That's fantastic, Keith. And Keith now multiple times has mentioned, the FinBin database and the fact that we're able to share that information and compare to benchmarks directly to producers. Pauline, you work a lot on the FinBin database. Can you share a little bit with the group? What is it? And also, why is it so important that we integrated this cover crop financial data gathering into that database?
Yes, thanks, Vincent, and thanks for the collaboration, and always appreciate the ability to work with EDF and Minnesota State and Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So FinBin, we've alluded to FinBin here a little bit, but FinBin is a free, publicly available database that, as Keith and Ann already talked about, it has real farm financial records. So anyone can access FinBin at any time. Just go to finbin.umn.edu. And each year there's about data from about 3,500 farms, mostly from the upper Midwest, that come to FinBin through farm management programs, much like Minnesota State and others. So there's other programs across the country that also contribute to FinBin. So the data comes directly from farms associated with these farm management programs. It's not survey-based, but producers are actually sharing their financial records anonymously, as was already said, and the data is carefully reviewed for accuracy, and we have consistent protocols that we use before the data is added to the database. Some of those consistent protocols relate directly to the cover crop analysis and how we're asking that be analyzed and such. So once you're at Finbin, you can explore reports on the whole farm level, crop enterprises, and then livestock enterprises as well. There's two main types of reports that you can query. The first one is summary reports, which shows average values for whatever you selected, whatever your query is, the filters that you put in place and such. Benchmark reports, on the other hand, show how farms compare across performance levels. So it's showing from the lowest 20% to the highest 20%. As Keith alluded to, that's one of the things that farmers participating in the program appreciate seeing, and then just others that aren't in a program can seek out to help compare themselves to. So you can always filter the Finbin data by location, farm size, profitability, production practices, and much more. So it's pretty easy to find a comparison that matches your operation, even if you are not in a farm management program or it's not directly in your backyard.
And Pauline, this information, of course, we have a wealth of data in Minnesota and Wisconsin. For folks that are in other states, are there points of information within the database that are informative to them? Can you share a little bit more about some of the other states that have strong financial benchmarking data within the database, just so that folks on this call, I know, are from multiple states, may value knowing that they have similar information available to them?
Yeah, good question. Finbin does cover mainly the upper Midwest, like you said. The majority of our data is in Minnesota, but Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, we have lots of partners across the country that contribute data. So there's several cover crop related reports that any producer could find valuable to help evaluate the financial impact of using cover crops in their specific operation. So in general, the Finbin data is pretty general and can provide value to you as a producer wherever you are, or in the public sector, like Keith shared earlier. So, Milan talked a lot already about the cost control aspect of cover crops and income generation. So, you can learn more about that in those queries. But there are a couple different cover crop type reports that maybe I'll just touch on quickly. So just so you're aware, if you're here listening, so there's just first off, there's crop enterprise reports that look at the cover crop enterprise itself as its own production enterprise. So Anne talked about planting rye as a crop on her farm. So that rye enterprise will in the future come into Finbin as its own enterprise that can be looked at and look at the direct cost of growing it and any production related income or cost share type income that comes into that enterprise. In much of what Milan shared in point number 4, or key takeaway number 4, was using what we call the cover crop impact report information. So that's comparing total costs and returns of a commodity crop that's planted after a cover crop. So both crops are included in that. And compares it to the acres of the same commodity crop that are grown without a cover crop. So as she already shared, you can get a side-by-side look at the yield, costs, and net returns. So also, just so you know, there's the first time you're running a cover crop report, there's some nuances in the data and in Finbin to get the information you're looking for. So to make it easier to find and use these reports, we have added along the way a help section on Finbin on the website that specifically covers how to query cover crops. So if you go to the how-to tab in the upper right-hand corner of the homepage, you will be able to see that, and there's some detailed instructions on how to run these different reports. And I think that link will be shared in the chat for you as well.
Yeah, there's so much there to learn from, Pauline. I think I really recommend people on the call go check it out afterwards and see all the types of reports that you can run and what you can learn from them. Bring it back to Minnesota, Brad, as Milan shared in the findings of our analysis, cost share programs are really helpful, especially as producers implement conservation practices for the first time. It helps de-risk their implementation. Tell us a little bit about the programs that are available through the Minnesota Department of Ag that producers are implementing.
Happy to. It's a pleasure to be here. Outstanding panel to be amongst. I appreciate the opportunity. I manage what we call our Agriculture Conservation Services section. And what we are doing in that section, we're trying to be very intentional about it, of course, is to provide a service to growers. And we want to do that through programs and through incentive programs. I'll focus on two real quickly this afternoon. First being our Minnesota Agriculture Water Quality Certification Program. It's a very involved program, but it can be described very simply at the same time as a risk assessment where farmers work one-on-one, one-on-one with an accredited conservation and agronomy professional to review their entire operation, look for what risks points there may be for water quality, and work then with that professional for the means to mitigate those risks, find financial assistance, the incentive payments, for that matter, the technical assistance to solve those challenges that are present. And so a cover crop with all of its attributes and conservation benefits, from wind erosion to water quality to you name it, there's so many services. That is a service, cover cropping that we certainly deliver through that program. And it's important to us to know about what is being learned in the use of the cover crop since we are essentially marketing it. Our second one to touch on quickly is our Soil Health Financial Assistance Program, where with that program, we are making grants for the purchase of a specialized equipment for soil health. Oftentimes, very often, cover cropping is what that equipment is being purchased by our participating growers. That program works on an application basis, competitive application, the minimum $500 up to $45,000 max at 50% of the cost of equipment. Although if it's 50% exceeds 45, you'll stop at 45. But that program is seeing like about oversubscribed. We're seeing probably 2/3 of the applications not being reached with the dollars that we have available. We run out of money before we even get through really 1/3 of the applicants. So it's definitely identified a need. And that need is also, I think, going to be a learning experience. As we've been talking about, the economic conditions out there are tough. I think that's underlying this whole conversation today. Things are getting really serious in agriculture, and purchasing equipment, that's going to be potentially a huge challenge for growers to begin with. But the reasons our Soil Health Financial Assistance Program has been so popular is that that's been such an obstacle, where we can give them incentives for cover crop seed and that sort of thing in one hand, but then on the other hand, they're going like, well, I have no way of applying that seed. So what good is that incentive particularly doing me? So it's important that we have kind of both of those sides now covered, but it also creates a real challenge and really does ask the economic question.
Brad, it is really fantastic that through your programs, you're providing help with, the incentives on the practices themselves, but also on the equipment side, because it is, as you said, a barrier to being able to do the second, actually implementing the practices. From your perspective, as you've implemented these programs and that more information like the data from our program has come out, how has that type of information helped inform you, your colleagues, and other partners to develop those incentive programs that actually overcome real financial challenges that the producers are facing when considering implementing conservation practices?
I mean, it's central. I mean, it's a big responsibility that we would have as the service provider, as describing, that we need to know, have eyes wide open. We need to know the good things, the bad things, the risks, the challenges, whatever's there. You don't want to just overlook things, pretend it'll all be better later. We need to have that information, and we're working with the professionals here when we have Keith and Patricia and Dan. I mean, that informs our work so much, the Finbin database and the work Keith does with us on our own programs, where we're analyzing the profitability of our farmer participants in the water quality certification program, for that matter. But it's all an exercise of eyes wide open, educate ourselves, continual learning. Because when we are out there working with the growers, what I keep describing is providing them that service, we have to do that responsibly, and we have to know what risks are out there, what the challenges are, what history is showing. With each succeeding report and each succeeding effort of research on this topic, it's just all further to our benefit, and ultimately, of course, to the growers' benefit.
It's great to hear, Brad, how informative that data and information can be in a state like yours, and we wish to be able to grow that type of information in other states where professionals like you may not have the information to really continue to refine and provide the financial and technical services in the most effective way to growers. Turning back to you, and you mentioned earlier that you've participated in cost share programs, and that has helped you through some of those ups and downs and what works and what doesn't work when you try implementing conservation practices. Can you share a little bit more about, like, frankly, the role that those programs have had helping you through those ups and downs, and perhaps even overcoming some of the barriers that you may have faced in even doing any of the practices to start with?
Sure. Yeah, I think I've participated in many of the ones Brad just listed. So it's nice to be here in good company today. Yeah, I think when I think about like my peers and in agriculture and grain production especially, is that like the margins are really low, or if not underwater, the risk is very high. And so inertia ends up kind of sometimes being king. And so you're swimming against the current if you want to try and change things on your operation. And we always remind ourselves that we're moving the needle on our farm, and that we're not doing wholesale changes of our operation overnight. That our journey to soil health is just that, a journey. And so, in 2021, we got our farm ag water quality certified for a couple different reasons. One of them was that we were feeling like the way that we were farming was something that we wanted to be proud of, and we wanted that kind of that badge of saying that, this farm is. Well, I farm in the headwaters of the Minnesota River Valley, and that is something that I want, like a badge of honor, of saying the water that leaves my farm is going into the Minnesota River and is in good, high quality condition. As a Minnesotan, we take our water very seriously. And so we became ag water quality certified. Once we got ag water quality certified, that opened some cost sharing opportunities for us to try different practices. Just last year, we did a cover cropping cost share following a winter camelina crop, which is a winter oil seed that we've been planting on our farm that's going into the sustainable aviation fuel market. And that was something that was successful with a full season cover going into our next soybean field. So as we're like looking at these things, we're trying different practices. We're going to be we did plant this year a couple different cover crop blends on soybean stubble, coming off of a very successful bean harvest this year, that we're really excited to see them taking off this year. And some of those things were cost shared through ag water quality certified. The way that we were able to plant those in the camelina itself was because in 2023 we applied for and were awarded one of those soil health financial assistance grants that Brad mentioned to help remove that barrier for farmers. Prior to then, we had been planting winter camelina, but we did it in like what felt like at the time the most bootstrapped way we knew how to. We were hand mixing. We had on our farm. We were using the equipment that we had, but we had a old John Deere box drill, 450 box drill. That was my father-in-law's, and we were camelina being a very small seeded crop, doesn't flow through well. You have to plant it at relatively low rates, unlike your other small grains, pardon me. And we were bulking it up with using oats, which worked out really well as like a nurse crop for winter camelina, but we were hand mixing it in the box, which I would not recommend. That felt very stupid. It was very labor intensive, right? So we did it twice, which was not a great idea. And the third time fooled me again. We applied for a grant to get a no-till drill. So, to achieve that goal of doing less soil disturbance, less tillage on our farm, with a small seed attachment on it, so we could plant our camelina with the small seed attachment. That was a long way of getting there. And now we're able to, this fall, we planted winter camelina on soybean stubble. We planted a mix of rye, hairy vetch, and camelina on another field of soybean stubble, both of which have germinated, look really beautiful. I'm excited about that. We use the no-till drill to plant rye into standing corn stubble. All of these in like no-till situations. So this is 100, 300, over 300 acres, 350 acres of soil that won't get turned over this fall. It won't get disturbed. It'll have a continuous living root in it. These are all winter hardy annuals that will terminate in the spring. But we've seen in our experience over the last several years that this sets up our cash crop for hopefully better success. We've also learned tough lessons there where things don't work out as well, but we're optimistic about what's there now. We've planted cover crops into drought conditions that winter killed, and didn't do anything for us. You're controlling what you can control in agriculture. You can't control Mother Nature.
Absolutely. And someone submitted a question that I think goes to you and was going to be my final question to you, but I'll read the exact question because I think it brings it into the perspective of the challenges that producers are facing in the market today. The question asks, given the economic challenges facing farmers, what advice do you give current cover crop users? And what about growers that are interested in growing cover crops but haven't tried them yet?
I mean, I would say just start small. Always start small on everything. Don't do what I'm currently doing because I've been doing this for many years. Don't do it on half your acres or 100% of your acres. If you start with 30 acres, we just planted our first cover crop field with a 30-acre field. And then I think our FBM instructor will show when we do our P&L here this winter, after harvest wraps, we are participating in as many conservation programs as we can find and get ourselves into. Because that does make a difference, especially given these economic times. It makes a difference in our bottom line and our ability. The the two programs that we're participating in for this diverse mix on our soybean stubble, and then the straight rye cover. I'm pointing to the fields as if you guys know where they are. The straight rye on our corn stubble, those are through Bowser or through, excuse me, the my local SWCD, right? And they're gonna doing that will make my drill payment this year, right? That cost share will make my drill payment this year. Oh, that was the other program that I participated in. Knock them all out. So for the first half of that no-till drill was paid for through the grant from the state of Minnesota. It was new to us. It was not a new drill. It was new to us. It was about $75,000. The state of Minnesota paid about 35 of it. And then we used an ag BMP program to get us a low interest loan that was run through our county for the other half. So we were saving some money on the interest rate for the lending portion of that drill. The programs we're participating in will basically pay us enough that we can pay for that machinery cost for this year. So I think that's my advice. Start small, go to your SWCD, get those trusted advisors, your agronomist, will definitely help you kind of hook you up, hopefully, with, what options there are out there. Those trusted advisors, I think, are really critical too.
And thanks for sharing that. It's amazing to hear in an example like yours, the combination of resources that can be brought together to support producers in making those implementation decisions, the combination of state programs, SWCD, lending opportunities that can bring down the cost of equipment for conservation practices. There's really opportunity to bring together a lot of partners to help make it more feasible and less risky for producers to make these investments and try out, as you have learned over time, the ways that you can make the conservation practices work on your operation. There have been a few other questions that have been entered into the Q&A that relate to a similar point. And Milan, I'll invite you back because I think you'll be able to help answer some of these questions. One of the questions that has been asked and continues to be of interest to a lot of stakeholders is how much does experience in implementing conservation practices, let's say if you have 3 years of doing the practice, 5+ years of the practice, how much does that influence the profitability? So we have a few questions that went to that. Milan, I'd love for you to share kind of what we found from the 3 years of data that we've been gathering, and then I welcome others to weigh in on their experience as a producer or with producers of what they've seen as producers gain more experience and the impacts it has on profitability. Milan, to you first.
Yeah, so there are a few findings in our study that might potentially be able to clarify that. Well, first of all, there's a detailed table in our report that compares high versus low profit farms. I did not have time to show it today, but you can take a look at the report. Interestingly, the experience levels of these farms do not differ significantly. So what we see is that the high profit farms on average, they have 8 years of experience, whereas the low profit farm on average have 6 years of experience. So you can see that the difference in the experience levels is not that significant. What is really important though is that we found that the high profit farms perform consistently better overall. So looking at both the revenue and the cost sides, they are just the one being able to take advantage of all of the revenue generating channels, including incentive programs, cost share payments, as well as some of the technical assistance, I assume, that Brad mentioned earlier. So they're just being a better manager overall compared to the less profitable farms. What we do see though, with regard to experience level difference between the high profit versus the low profit farms is that the more profitable farms tend to use more complex cover crop mixes that can have improved soil health. So there was a question earlier about whether the high profit farm was just able to identify right away the type of cover crop that can generate additional revenue, while it's not necessarily what we see in the data. So if you look at the table, the share of rice silage for the high profits versus the low profit farms are pretty similar. So they're not essentially using more rice silage from the start, but they're just the ones who are able to take advantage of additional revenue and be able to manage their costs a lot more effectively, and therefore cutting down the expenses and having the overall net returns that are higher than the low profit farms.
So it's a little bit more complex, and there's some nuances in the decisions of which types of conservation or types of cover crops that they're utilizing when throughout their journey of understanding and implementing the practice. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that before we wrap things up?
One thing I might offer just is your level of experience. The more experienced you are, the better, of course, because you'll have done it and started small, like Andrew's recommending. But I think there's real opportunities now, and it's really grown over the last several years of having essentially mentors out there that have been doing this. They've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, some of these folks. An organization like the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, made up of folks who serve as mentors and provide that service to growers. That's, when you see growers of equal experience with divergent economic results from their cover cropping, I think what the advantage or the opportunity there is for them to seek out some mentors, some folks that have done this before, and really get themselves as best as they can set up for success.
So a great combination of experience pays, learning, and it pays to learn from those with experience. Well, thank you all for your insights, your expertise, and your continued partnership. Just to wrap things up, I just want to share that, as Milan shared, this program is going to continue to gather financial data and provide insights on exactly these important topics to help inform producers and their partners on the profitability impacts and considerations of cover crops. You can find more information about this, as we said, on the Finbin database, at the AgCentric website, as well as on the EDF website, which we can share as well. So be on the lookout for those reports. There's even more detailed information to learn from there. And if you have any questions or desires to contribute or collaborate on this project, please reach out to us after this meeting. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you again to the panelists, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.